You know what your problem is, Leora? You think you're smart enough to figure things out. But you're not. You never were. My sister said that to me at my own birthday dinner while our parents nodded like she was reading scripture. She was 29, I was 25, and the restaurant smelled like garlic bread and something I wanted to forget. For years later, her resume was sitting on my desk, printed on expensive cream-colored paper, and the name at the top, Kendra Blackwell Torres, was trembling slightly because my hands were the ones holding it. Let me start at the beginning. Because the resume didn't fall from the sky. It crawled there through 19 years of history, 6 years of silence, and one very specific morning in August that rearranged everything I thought I knew about my sister, my family, and myself. My name is Leora Blackwell. I'm 31 years old. I live in Traverse City, Michigan, in a converted cherry barn on 4 acres of land that backs up to the Boardman River. I bought it at a tax auction in 2021 for $186,000 and spent 14 months renovating it myself. And by myself, I mean me, a YouTube tutorial library, a secondhand nail gun, and a stubbornness that my mother once described as exhausting. The barn has exposed beams, original stone foundation walls, and a loft office where I run my company, Blackwell Environmental Consulting. We do contamination assessment, ecological restoration planning, and environmental compliance auditing for municipal governments and private developers across the upper Midwest. I have 23 employees. Our annual contracts total $19 million. I did not go to college. That last sentence is the one that matters. Because in my family, it was the only sentence anyone ever heard. My sister, Kendra, is 4 years older than me. She graduated summa cum laude from the University of Michigan in 2016 with a double major in economics and communications. She got her MBA from Michigan State in 2018. She was hired straight out of graduate school by Kesslerite, a mid-size management consulting firm in Grand Rapids, and within 3 years she'd made senior associate. She drove a white Lexus NX. She wore Theory blazers. She had a LinkedIn profile that looked like a press release. She was, by every metric our family recognized, the success story. I was the other one. Growing up in Petoskey, Michigan, I was the kid who couldn't sit still in class. Not because I was hyperactive. Because I was bored. Not the kind of bored where you already know the material. The kind of bored where the material doesn't connect to anything you care about and nobody bothers to find out what you do care about. I cared about the lake. I cared about the woods behind our house. I cared about the creek that ran along the property line, the one that turned orange one summer because a construction company upstream had dumped fill dirt into a drainage ditch and released iron oxide into the water. I was 14 when that happened. I spent 3 weeks collecting water samples in mason jars and testing them with a chemistry kit I'd ordered online with birthday money. I documented the contamination, mapped the source, and wrote a 9-page report that I brought to the county health department. They ignored it. But the local newspaper didn't. A reporter named Dale Voss ran a small story in the Petoskey News Review. The construction company was fined $12,000. The creek cleared up by fall. Nobody in my family cared. My dad read the article and said, "That's nice, sweetheart." My mom put the clipping on the fridge for a week, then moved it to make room for Kendra's honor roll certificate. Kendra didn't mention it at all. She was 18, about to leave for Ann Arbor, and the creek behind our house wasn't part of the world she was building. I don't blame her for that. I blame her for what came after. I dropped out of community college at 19. I'd enrolled at Northwestern Michigan College in Traverse City because it was expected, the way brushing your teeth is expected. You just do it. But 3 semesters in, I was failing microeconomics and barely passing English composition, and the only class I'd gotten an A in was an elective called Environmental Science 101, taught by a professor named Dr. Anika Petrov, who had spent 15 years doing wetland restoration in the Great Lakes region. She was the first person who ever looked at me and said, "You don't need a degree to do this work. You need field work. And you need to not quit." I quit college the next week. My parents held a family meeting about it. I'm not exaggerating. They literally sat me down in the living room, the one with the brown carpet and the ceiling fan that clicked every 4 seconds, and they talked to me for an hour. My dad said I was throwing my life away. My mom said she was concerned about my future. Kendra, who was home for winter break from Ann Arbor, sat on the arm of the couch and said the thing that would define the next decade of my life. Leora, let's be real. You've always been the slow one. That's not mean. It's just true. Some people are built for school, and some people aren't. But school is where the opportunities are. Without it, what are you going to do? You're going to end up working at a gas station or waiting tables, and in 10 years you're going to wish you'd listened. She said it with the kind of confidence that comes from never having been wrong about anything. Or, at least, never having been told she was wrong. My parents didn't correct her. My dad actually nodded. My mom looked at her hands. And I sat there on the couch, 19 years old, with a ceiling fan clicking above me like a metronome counting down the seconds of my credibility. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I stood up, went to my room, packed a bag, and drove to Traverse City that night. I had $3,200 in savings, a 2004 Honda Civic with 140,000 miles on it, and Dr. Petrov's phone number written on a sticky note in my glove compartment. I called her the next morning. She picked up on the second ring. I dropped out, I said. Good, she said. Now the real education starts. Dr. Petrov didn't sugarcoat anything. She told me the environmental field was brutal for people without degrees. She told me I'd have to outwork everyone in the room to get half the respect. She told me I'd be taken seriously only when my results were so undeniable that credentials became irrelevant. Then she connected me with a nonprofit called Great Lakes Watershed Alliance and told me to show up Monday morning at 7 a.m. wearing boots that could handle mud. They hired me as a field technician for $14 an hour. The work was exactly as unglamorous as it sounds. I spent my first year collecting soil and water samples across northern Michigan, testing for contamination in sites that municipalities didn't have the budget to assess. I drove back roads in my Civic with coolers full of sample jars in the back seat, the rubber lids smelling like chemicals and lake water. I learned to read topographical maps under flashlight in parking lots. I learned to identify pollutant signatures in sediment by color, texture, and smell before the lab results even came back. I learned that environmental compliance in small-town America was a disaster, not because people didn't care, but because nobody was trained to look. There were days I wanted to quit. I won't pretend otherwise. January in northern Michigan, standing in a frozen marsh at 7:30 a.m. with a soil auger and wind chill at -15, collecting core samples while your fingers stop working inside your gloves. That tests you. I'd drive home afterward in my Civic with a heater on full blast and sit in the parking lot of my apartment complex, a converted motel on Garfield Road that charged $575 a month for a studio with a radiator that clanked all night, and I'd ask myself if this was actually going somewhere or if Kendra was right. If I was the slow one. If the dirt and the water and the maps were just an elaborate detour from the gas station she'd predicted. But then I'd get a result. A test would come back showing elevated levels of trichloroethylene in a residential well. I'd trace the source to a dry cleaning facility that had been dumping solvent into a drain pit for 12 years. A family would find out why their water tasted metallic. A county would issue a remediation order. And suddenly, the cold and the mud and the $14 an hour didn't matter. Because the work was real. It affected real people. And nobody else was doing it. By 21, I'd earned my Qualified Environmental Professional certification through the Institute of Professional Environmental Practice. No degree required. Just 5,000 hours of documented fieldwork, project reports reviewed by a panel, and a brutal 4-hour examination that covered everything from hydrogeology to regulatory compliance to ethical standards. I passed on my first attempt. Kendra, for reference, failed the CPA exam twice before passing. But nobody in my family ever mentioned that. They didn't need to. Kendra's failures were setbacks. Mine were evidence. By 23, I'd started freelancing. Small contracts. A contamination screening for a property developer in Leelanau County. An environmental impact assessment for a school district that wanted to build on a former orchard and needed to know if decades of pesticide application had compromised the soil. That one paid $8,000. I did all the fieldwork myself. wrote the report on a laptop at a coffee shop on Front Street in Traverse City, and delivered it 2 weeks early. The school district superintendent sent me a handwritten thank you note. It's still pinned to the wall in my office. By 25, I'd incorporated Blackwell Environmental Consulting. Just me, a part-time administrator named Greta, who I'd met at a Traverse City Chamber of Commerce mixer, and a rented desk in a shared office space above a bike shop on Union Street. That year, we billed $340,000. Not life-changing money, but enough to prove that the thing I was building had a pulse. That was also the year of the birthday dinner. The one where Kendra called me slow in front of our parents at a restaurant in Petoskey, a place called Chandler's that overlooks Little Traverse Bay and serves the kind of food that's trying hard to be fancy, but can't quite escape its northern Michigan bones. We were eating at a table by the window. The sun was going down over the water, turning the bay this deep copper color that made everything look warmer than it was. I was eating a piece of salmon and trying to celebrate turning 25 without incident, which in my family was always a tall order because celebrations had a way of becoming performances, and Kendra was always the lead. She'd driven up from Grand Rapids in her white Lexus, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She'd spent the first 20 minutes of dinner talking about a new client her firm had landed, a regional hospital system that was restructuring its administrative costs. She used words like synergy and value proposition and stakeholder alignment. My dad listened like he was attending a lecture at Harvard. My mom smiled and squeezed Kendra's arm the way she used to squeeze mine when I brought home a drawing from kindergarten. Except Kendra was 29, and the drawing was a PowerPoint deck about cost optimization. Then someone asked me how work was going. I think it was my dad. He asked the way you'd ask about the weather. Polite. Low stakes. Not really expecting an answer that mattered. I said things were good. I mentioned the school district project. I mentioned a new contract with a township in Antrim County. Kendra looked at me with an expression I'd seen 100 times, that specific blend of pity and amusement that told you she was about to say something she'd already decided was helpful. Leora, I'm glad you're keeping busy. But let's be honest. You're doing water tests and dirt samples. That's not a career. That's a hobby with invoices. My dad laughed. Not a big laugh. A soft one. The kind that tells you he agreed, but didn't want to be the one who said it. That was the night I stopped going home for holidays. Not dramatically. Not with an announcement. I just started being busy. Thanksgiving? Working. Christmas? Out of town. Easter? Didn't come up. My mom would call and say, "We miss you." And I'd say, "I miss you too," and we'd both pretend that was enough. What happened over the next 6 years isn't a montage. It's not a training sequence with inspiring music. It was slow, unglamorous, and relentless. I worked. That's it. I worked on days I was tired. I worked on days I was sick. I worked on weekends and holidays and on my birthday, and on the anniversary of the night I'd driven away from Petoskey with a bag in my back seat and a sticky note in my glove compartment. By 27, I'd hired 5 people. Real employees. Full-time with benefits. A hydrologist named Tomas who'd been doing contract work for the state and was desperate for something stable. A GIS specialist named Priya who could map a contamination plume with a precision that made state regulators jealous. A field tech named Orion who'd served 4 years in the Army Corps of Engineers and knew more about soil composition than most professors. Good people. Overlooked people. People who, like me, had been told their skills weren't enough because the packaging didn't look right. By 29, we'd moved into a proper office. A converted warehouse on 8th Street in Traverse City, right near the bay. The building had tall windows, exposed brick, and a conference room that looked out over the water. I could see the Boardman Lake from my desk. In the mornings, the light came through the windows at an angle that turned everything gold. I'd sit there at 6 a.m. with a cup of coffee and think about the creek behind my parents' house, the one that turned orange when I was 14. That creek was the beginning of everything. And nobody in my family knew. By 30, Blackwell Environmental had 18 employees and was billing $14 million annually. We'd won a $3.2 million contract with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy for a statewide contamination mapping initiative. We were the smallest firm to win a contract of that size in the state that year. The Traverse City Record Eagle ran a story. I didn't send it to my family. There was no point. They'd already decided who I was. Sending them evidence to the contrary would have felt like begging for a verdict that should have been obvious. Then came August of last year. I was in my office. It was a Tuesday, 9:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I just looked at the clock after my second cup of coffee, the one Greta always brought me from the cafe downstairs, black with 1 sugar. My HR director, a woman named Della, who'd been with me since we had 8 employees, knocked on my door. "Got a stack of resumes for the senior environmental analyst position," she said. "There's one I think you should see first." She set a single resume on my desk. Cream-colored paper, clean formatting, professional headshot in the corner, which nobody does anymore, but Kendra always insisted made her look serious. Michigan State MBA. Kessler Wright Management Consulting. Senior Associate. 6 years of experience in operational efficiency, client relationship management, and strategic restructuring. Kendra Blackwell-Torres. I read her name, and I closed my office door. I sat with that resume for 11 minutes. I know because the clock on my wall has a second hand that I suddenly couldn't stop watching. My sister had applied to my company. My company. The one she'd called a hobby with invoices. The one attached to the dropout, the slow one, the girl who couldn't pass microeconomics. That sister had typed her credentials into a job portal, attached her resume, and hit submit, without knowing that on the other side of the screen was me. Or maybe she did know. I couldn't tell. The application had come through our general portal. No cover letter. No personal note. Just the resume and a generic, "I am writing to express my interest," email that had clearly been copied and pasted from a template. She'd applied to 40 companies. I found out later. 40. Mine was just another line in a spreadsheet. I called Della back in. "Do you know who this is?" I asked. Della looked at the resume. Kendra Blackwell-Torres. Strong resume. Management consulting background, MBA, solid client experience. But honestly, she's overqualified for the analyst role and underqualified for the environmental work. She doesn't have a single certification in the field. No fieldwork experience. No environmental science coursework. On paper, she's a management person in a science hat. "She's my sister," I said. Della sat down. "Oh, yeah. Do you want me to auto-reject?" I stared at the resume, at Kendra's name, at the headshot where she was smiling the way she always smiled, confident, composed, certain that the camera should be grateful for her presence. And I thought about what the right thing to do was. Not the satisfying thing. Not the karmic thing. The right thing. "No," I said. "Schedule her for an interview." Della looked at me like I'd suggested we hold the meeting on the moon. "Leora, are you sure?" "I'm sure." The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday at 2 p.m. I spent the days in between trying to decide how I felt. Not about the logistics. The logistics were simple. She'd either be qualified or she wouldn't. I felt something more complicated than that. Something I didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't even anger. It was something closer to grief. Grief for the version of our relationship that could have existed if she'd ever looked at me and seen something other than a failure. Grief for all the dinners I'd skipped and the phone calls I'd shortened and the holidays I'd spent alone in my barn because being with my family meant being reminded of who they thought I was. Thursday came. I wore what I always wear. Dark jeans, a flannel button-up, boots. I don't own a blazer. I've never owned a blazer. My office doesn't have a dress code because my office values what people produce, not what they wear while producing it. I sat behind my desk and waited. Della brought Kendra in at 2:02 p.m. I watched my sister walk through the door, and I saw the exact moment she realized. It took about 1.5 seconds. Her eyes moved from Della to me, then to the nameplate on my desk, then back to me. Her face went through something I can only describe as a software crash. A total system failure. Every assumption, every label, every story she'd ever told herself about who I was and who she was, all of it hit a wall at the same time. Leora, she said. Her voice cracked on the second syllable.
Hi, Kendra.
Sit down. She sat. She didn't take off her coat. She didn't put her bag down properly. She just dropped into the chair across from my desk like someone had cut her strings. Her eyes moved around the office. The framed contracts on the wall. The topographical map of northern Michigan with project sites marked in red pins. The window overlooking Boardman Lake. The team photo from our company retreat last fall, 23 people standing on the shores of Glen Lake, everyone smiling, me in the center holding a sign that said Year 6. This is yours, she said. All of it. I didn't know. Leora, I swear I didn't. I know you didn't. You applied through the portal. You didn't check who owned the company. I applied to 40. I know. She stopped talking. Her hands were in her lap. The Lexus confidence was gone. The Theory blazer was gone, replaced by a blouse that looked like it had been ironed 3 times that morning. She looked like someone sitting across from a truth she'd spent a decade outrunning. What happened at Kesslerite? I asked, not to twist the knife, because I genuinely wanted to know. She took a breath. They restructured the consulting division, cut 30% of senior staff. I was in the second wave. They gave me 4-week severance and a box for my desk. She paused. That was 5 months ago. And the 40 applications? Mostly management consulting. A few corporate strategy roles. I got 6 interviews. 1 second round. No offers. She looked at her hands. The market's different now. Everyone wants specialists. People who do one thing well. I'm a generalist. I do a little of everything, and none of it is this. She gestured around my office.
At the maps.
The certifications. The river. I let the silence sit. Outside, a kayak was cutting across Boardman Lake, leaving a V-shaped wake in the flat morning water. A phone rang somewhere down the hall. Priya's voice, muffled, talking to someone about phosphorus levels in a retention pond. Kendra, I said. Do you remember what you said to me at my 25th birthday dinner? She closed her eyes. Leora. You called me the slow one. You said I'd end up working at a gas station. You said my work was a hobby with invoices. I was wrong. I know you were wrong. I've known for a long time. But I need you to understand something. I didn't build this to prove you wrong. I built this because the work mattered. Every contamination site we map, every water system we test, every school that gets built safely, because we did our job, that matters. I didn't drop out of college because I was slow. I dropped out because the thing I was supposed to do didn't fit inside a classroom. And instead of anyone in my family asking what did fit, you all just assumed I was broken. Kendra was crying. Not the performative, photogenic kind. The ugly kind. The kind where your nose runs and your mascara streaks, and you can't find a tissue, so you use the back of your hand. Della had quietly left a box of Kleenex on the edge of my desk. I hadn't seen her do it. That's Della. She anticipates everything. I'm sorry, Kendra said. I am so sorry, Leora. Not because I need a job. Because I spent my whole life thinking I was better than you, and I was just louder. That sentence hit me in a place I didn't know was still tender. I was just louder. Not smarter. Not more capable. Not more valuable. Just louder. And in our family, volume was the only currency. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're not qualified for the senior analyst role. You don't have the certifications, the field experience, or the technical background. I'm not going to hire you for a position you can't do just because you're my sister. That would be unfair to my team and unfair to you. Her face fell. Not dramatically. Just the quiet dimming of someone who'd known this was coming but hoped it wouldn't. But I said, we have an opening for a client relations coordinator. It's a new role. We're expanding into municipal government contracts, and we need someone who can manage relationships with city councils, county boards, and state agencies. Someone who understands how to translate technical language into stakeholder language. Someone who can walk into a room of skeptical politicians and make them care about soil contamination. Your MBA, your consulting experience, your ability to talk to anyone about anything, that's exactly what the role needs. She stared at me. You'd hire me? I'd offer you an interview. A real one. With Della and Tomas. If they sign off, you're in. If they don't, you're not. No special treatment. No family discount. No pity. Why? She whispered. After everything I said. After how I treated you. Why would you do this? I looked at her for a long time. At my older sister. The one who'd called me slow. The one who'd laughed with our parents while I sat on a couch and felt myself shrink. The one who'd driven away in a white Lexus while I drove away in a Honda Civic with 140,000 miles and a sticky note in the glove compartment. Because Dr. Petrov gave me a chance when nobody else saw anything worth investing in, I said. And I'm not going to be the person who looks at someone struggling and decides they deserve it. That's not who I built this company to be. We hire overlooked people here, Kendra. People the system missed or dismissed. A hydrologist who spent 5 years doing contract work with no benefits. A GIS specialist who was told her accent made her hard to place in corporate settings. A field tech who came home from the army and couldn't get an interview because his resume had a 2-year gap. This office is full of people who were told they weren't enough. And every single one of them is extraordinary. So no, I'm not going to look at you and decide you don't deserve a chance. But I am going to make you earn it. The way I earned everything in this room. Kendra's interview with Della and Tomas happened the following Monday. It lasted 90 minutes. Della told me afterward that Kendra was annoyingly impressive in the stakeholder communication portion and completely lost during the technical overview, which was exactly what I expected. Tomas said she asked good questions, which in his world was the highest compliment a non-scientist could receive. They both signed off. Kendra started on September 15th. She arrived at 7:30 a.m., 90 minutes before she needed to. She was wearing jeans and a button-up. No blazer. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't need to. I assigned her to shadow Tomas for the first 2 weeks. Not because she needed to learn hydrology. Because she needed to understand what we actually did. She needed to stand in a field at 8 a.m. and watch someone collect a soil core and understand that the dirt, the data, the slow and careful work of measuring what's invisible, was the foundation of everything the company was built on. She needed to see the thing she'd called a hobby. Tomas told me later that on the second day, Kendra had asked him to explain how contamination migrates through groundwater. He drew a diagram on the back of a fast food napkin. She listened for 20 minutes. When he finished, she said, "My sister figured all of this out without a degree?" Tomas said yes. Kendra didn't say anything else for the rest of the drive. The first month was hard. Not the work. The dynamic. She'd walk past my office and slow down, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. I'd see her in the break room, staring out the window at the lake with a coffee cup she wasn't drinking from. Twice, I caught her standing in front of the team photo on the hallway wall, the one from Glen Lake, studying the faces of people who'd been with me for years. People who knew what I'd built. People who'd never once called me slow. Once, Della told me she'd found Kendra in the conference room after hours, reading through our case study binder, the one we give to prospective clients. She got into the section about the school district project, the one I'd done at 23, the contaminated orchard, and Della said Kendra was just sitting there holding the page, not reading anymore, just holding it. In October, she came to my office after hours. Everyone else had gone home. The building was quiet except for the furnace kicking on and the sound of the bay lapping against the dock outside. She sat down in the chair across from my desk, the same chair she'd collapsed into during the interview, and she said, "I called Mom last night." Okay. I told her about the company, about what you've built, about the 23 employees and the state contracts and the office on the water. What did she say? Kendra paused.
She cried.
Then she asked why you never told them. What did you say? I said, because we never made it safe enough for her to. I didn't respond right away. I let that sentence settle into the room like dust after an earthquake. Because it was the truest thing anyone in my family had ever said about me. They never made it safe. The conversations were never open. The dinner table was never a place where I could say, I built something extraordinary, without hearing, but you didn't finish college. The conditions for honesty didn't exist. So I built in silence. And the silence became the story they told themselves. Mom wants to visit, Kendra said. I know. Will you let her? I looked out the window. The lake was dark. The moon was sitting on the water, like a coin someone had dropped from a great height. The cherry trees on my property were bare. It was October in northern Michigan, and everything was getting ready for winter. Getting ready to go quiet. Yeah, I said. She can come. My mom visited in November. She drove up from Petoskey with my dad. They parked in the gravel lot outside the office and sat in the car for 5 minutes before coming in. Della told me later she'd watched them through the window, and my mom had been wiping her eyes before she even opened the door. I gave them a tour. I showed them the lab where we test water samples. I showed them the GIS room where Priya builds contamination maps that look like weather systems made of color. I showed them the conference room where I'd presented to state regulators and won the biggest contract in our company's history. My dad stood in the middle of my office, looked at the view, looked at the team photo, looked at the nameplate on my desk, and then looked at me. I didn't know, he said. I know, Dad. Why didn't you tell us? I took a breath. Because the last time I tried to tell you about my work, Kendra called it a hobby with invoices. And you laughed. He didn't say anything for a long time. My mom was holding my dad's arm. She was crying quietly, the way she does, without sound, just tears running down her face, and her chin trembling slightly. I'm sorry, Leora, my dad said. I should have asked. I should have come up here years ago. I should have been paying attention. Yeah, I said. You should have. He hugged me. It wasn't long, maybe 5 seconds. But it was the first time in 12 years that a hug from my father felt like it meant something beyond obligation. We had dinner that night at a restaurant downtown called The Cook's House, a small farm-to-table place on Wellington Street that uses ingredients sourced within 50 miles. The 5 of us. Me, Kendra, Mom, Dad, and Greta, because Greta had been with me since the beginning and she deserved a seat at the table. We ate whitefish and drank local wine from Chateau Chantal, a vineyard on the old Mission Peninsula that makes a dry Riesling that tastes like the lake somehow got into the grapes. My dad asked me about my work, real questions, questions with follow-ups, questions that required me to explain what a Phase 2 environmental assessment actually involves and why municipalities need independent auditors. He listened to the answers with an expression I'd never seen him wear before. Attention. Genuine, focused attention. Like he was seeing me for the first time and was embarrassed by how long it had taken. At one point during dinner, my mom reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She didn't say anything. She just held it there. Her hand was warm and small and trembling slightly. I could feel 12 years of missed conversations in that touch. 12 years of phone calls that ended too quickly. 12 years of holidays spent alone in a cherry barn, eating takeout and watching the river and wondering if they ever drove past the exit for Traverse City and thought about turning off. I kept the newspaper clipping, my mom said quietly. The one about the creek. From when you were 14. I thought you threw it away. I moved it off the fridge. I never threw it away. It's in my nightstand. It's been there for 17 years. I didn't know what to do with that information. So I squeezed her hand and went back to my whitefish and let the silence be enough. Sometimes silence is the only thing big enough to hold what you're feeling. Kendra's been with the company for 7 months now.
She's good at the job.
Not just adequate.
Good.
She landed as a contract with Charlevoix County for a shoreline erosion assessment that's worth $1.1 million. She learned to read a Phase 1 environmental report well enough to present findings to a county board without needing me in the room. Last week, she was on a call with a township supervisor in Emmett County, and I heard her say, "Let me put you in touch with our lead hydrologist. He can explain the phosphorus data better than I can." She said it naturally, like someone who'd finally figured out that knowing when to defer was a form of intelligence all on its own. She still calls me her little sister. But the way she says it is different now. There's something behind it that wasn't there before. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. Or the quiet hum of a woman who is learning, for the first time at 35, that being the loudest voice in the room doesn't make you the most important one. Last Sunday, Kendra sent me a text at 10 p.m. Just 2 sentences. I read it sitting in my loft office in the Cherry Barn, the river running behind the property and that low murmur it makes in early spring, the sound I've fallen asleep to almost every night for 4 years. The text said, "I tell people my little sister is the smartest person I've ever met. I should have been saying that a long time ago." I read it twice. Then I set my phone down and looked out the window at the Boardman River, silver in the moonlight, running the same direction it always runs. Quiet, steady, unhurried, like something that knows exactly where it's going, even when nobody's watching.